words and language. No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Carpe diem. Seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary. This movie, Dead Poets Society, totally changed my life. It was 1989 when it came out. I don't think I saw it then. I would have only been, well, I would have been youngish. I probably saw it when I was in high school after finishing my BA, somewhere in between. I think I went to the local Blockbuster and rented it and was just completely inspired.
Carpe diem. Seize the day.
When I watched this movie, I was in a pivotal time in my life. I had just finished my BA. I was contemplating a future in education, or maybe technical writing, or freelance writing, or screenwriting, or advertising, where a lot of my friends went with their English majors. English majors rule the world. Who writes all your TV shows? Who writes all your copy for all your ads? Come on. Anyway, side note. So I didn't know what I was going to do with my BA. Then I saw this damn movie, and everything changed. Now, I didn't want to be Mr. Keating, but I knew that the power of poetry and the themes that came from poetry often were life-changing. And so as you watch this film, one, be warned, you may become a teacher. Two, really, really listen to the themes of this film. You will hear Mr. Keating fight against his administration because his goal is to make his students free thinkers. Free thinkers.
What was going on in the courtyard the other day?
Courtyard.
Yeah, boys marching, clapping in unison.
Oh, that was an exercise to prove a point. Dangers of conformity.
Well, John, the curriculum here is set. It's proven it works. If you question it, what's to prevent them from doing the same?
I always thought the idea of education was to learn to think for yourself.
At these boys' age, not on your life.
I know politically in the world today, a lot of schools are sort of deemed liberal institutions where people are indoctrinated into hating America and whatnot.
Our children are taught in school to hate their own country and to believe that the men and women who built it were not heroes, but that were villains.
I don't want to get into that, but what schools do, what good instructors do, is they do open the mind and expand some understanding that does lead to some free thinking. Sometimes free thinking leads to the idea that things need to change. And then comes some civil unrest. But that's not quite the point here. The point of Dead Poets Society is seize the day. Every day matters, every day counts. And it's best embodied in one of the poems featured in the film, or at least just the first stanza of Robert Herrick's famous poem called "To the Virgins to Make Much of Time." That's it. Robert Herrick in his poem says, "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Old time is still a-flying. And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying." And I asked my kid, my youngest, it was 11, I paused the film and I said, "Kiddo, what does that mean to gather ye rosebuds?" And I had to translate to, standard English of the 21st century. I said, "Kid, what does it mean to get your rosebuds today before they're gone tomorrow? What does that mean?" He understood. That's the cliche, is stop and smell the flowers. You may die tomorrow. And you did not take the time to smell the beauty around you, to see the beauty around you, to embrace the beauty around you. So gather your rosebuds while you may. And I think that's the essential ingredient in Mr. Keating's teaching, is to really impress upon these young boys, you have one life to live. You've got to make it great. And you've got to live it for yourself. So there's a fair amount of obedience in this film. You'll see in Neil Perry's character. I think Neil Perry's character is fantastic. Here's a guy ruled by his father, completely ruled by his father. His father has dictated his path.
You're going to Harvard, and you're going to be a doctor.
And as a college professor, I see a lot of this. Students who are only in school because their parents said they have to be, or they've chosen a major because their parents said you've got to be a computer engineer. And they like music and art and poetry. And it's a real challenge and a struggle with them. One of my favorite scenes is when Neil Perry, the kid, is talking to Mr. Keating. And he's talking to him about wanting to act. And Mr. Keating says, "You've got to tell your father." And Neil Perry says, "You know, I can't. There's no way. He won't listen."
But he's planning the rest of my life for me, and he's never asked me what I want.
Have you ever told your father what you just told me? About your passion for acting? You ever showed him that?
I can't.
Why not?
I can't talk to him this way.
And you're acting for him, too.
And then, and I'm quoting poorly, you'll watch the film. Mr. Keating says, "You have been acting your whole life. You've been playing the role of the dutiful son." I thought that was amazing, because here is a guy playing a role on stage, which is probably more clearly who he actually is than the role he's been playing his whole life as the dutiful son to his father. I found that fascinating, that an actor is more real on stage than he is at home with his own father. Ugh. I struggle with that a little bit in my own life. My beloved son is a aspiring filmmaker, and the Mr. Keating in me says, "Go for it, man. Be the next Spielberg or David Lynch." But then, the rational Neil Perry dad's part of me is like, ugh. You really probably want to be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer, or an entrepreneur, or a business major, or something, dude. Are you sure about this film stuff? Carpe diem, man. Carpe diem. I'm going to support him and let him live out his life in the best way he knows how. So the screenwriter, Tom Schulman, besides, the poetry his dad used to recite all day, he also went to a preparatory private academy, just like the boys in the film. And he had a teacher who was a little bit wild and crazy and outside the box, like Mr. Keating. So in some way, this film is an homage to his life as a student, and his own desire to find himself. I love that. Ultimately, when you watch this film, you'll see this film is about, bucking tradition, finding your voice, becoming a free thinker. It's really about the transformative power of art, especially poetry. Words matter, ideas matter. They can change the world. That is hammered over and over in this film into the boys' minds by Mr. Keating, which is, by the way, a huge threat to administration.
I'm hearing rumors, John, about some unorthodox teaching methods in your classroom. I'm not saying they've had anything to do with the Dalton boys' outburst. But I don't think I have to warn you, boys his age are very impressionable.
This film is really about getting in touch with the heart as well as the head. And, I don't want to genderize it, like tenderize it, but this is obviously a movie about boys at a boys' school. And who on this earth needs to better be in touch with their heart, their romantic side, their sensitive side, their artistic side, than a lot of men and boys today.
Chaos screaming, chaos dreaming. Gotta do more, gotta be more!
Which isn't to say there's not a lot of great artistic men out there. Hello. There are plenty. But at that time, in that era, especially, the idea of art being in any way a path to success or in any way important didn't seem to matter. I mean, this is definitely not a film that excludes women, but it is in many ways a film about boys.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate.
That's so sweet.
I made that up just for you.
You did?
So for Mr. Keating to come in and basically say, look, boys, you need to get in touch with your heart as much as you need to stay in touch with your head. I think that's powerful, and I think it's an important message for today's men. So notice when this film opens, they're really setting the stage for an environment of tradition, of honor. Everybody is dignified in their suits. Everybody in the administration is basically an old white guy. No offense to old white guys, there are a lot of great ones out there. But they symbolize the old guard, a power structure for years that has been passed down. And here's Mr. Keating going, you know, there are other ways. And you'll see that in their faces when they give the rules at the beginning of the class. Everybody is very punitive, and I'm going to punish you if you don't follow the rules.
Let me urge you now not to test me on this point.
So when we first meet the boys, we see them in that sort of churchy-looking hall, and everybody walks in with these big banners that say tradition, honor, discipline, excellence. These are the themes of the preparatory school, right?
Gentlemen, what are the 4 pillars?
Tradition, honor, discipline, excellence.
These are very traditional, right, time-honored traditions. However, I noticed something. If you rearrange or reorder those important criteria, you get discipline, excellence, tradition, and honor. All I did was reverse order them a little bit, and then that is death. So I thought I was pretty clever for figuring that out. I don't know if that's a puzzle that the screenwriter tried to implement. If it really was, he probably would have squeezed academics in there as an important trait so you could really see death clearly. Or maybe not. Maybe he just set this up so that people like me could see a different acronym. But these ideas are important, but there's a kind of spiritual death that occurs when you're only focused on tradition and honor and not, in some ways, breaking tradition. So, anyway, in walks Mr. Keating. One of the most iconic scenes is him saying, okay, everybody open your books, introduction of poetry.
Gentlemen, open your text, page 21 of the introduction.
And he says, now read it. And as he's reading it, and you'll see in the film, it's hilarious, there's this whole, like, flow chart and graph of how good poetry works. And Keating is outlining it, and then he tells the boys, rip out that page. Rip out that page. And the boys are like, what?
Rip it out! Thank you, Mr. Dalton. That's the Bible. You're not going to go to hell for this.
And he's basically saying rip up the rules of poetry, which is symbolic, of course, of life's rules, right? We've got all these preconceived social rules. We have to go to this school and get married by this time and have kids in this way. And those rules don't apply to everybody. So he's saying forget the rules. Be your own person. Be whatever the hell you want to be. Seize the day. There's not just social pressure, but there's familial pressure. When we first meet Todd Anderson, that's the Ethan Hawke character, I think this is his first role, by the way. And Todd Anderson, when we first meet him, you'll hear people say, oh, you've got a lot to live up to. Oh, your brother was so great, right? And so as probably a lot of second or third born kids out there whose alpha brother or alpha sister just crushed it, and you're like just kind of DJing and, you know, you're just kind of artistic and you're not sure where your life's going, but you are measured against the success of your siblings. And that extra pressure is really, really powerful for Todd Anderson. And then, you know, there's more and more and more symbolism. You know, when Robin Williams stands on the desk, he stands up there, and this is a message we need more than ever in our country today. He stands on the desk and he says, you know, why am I standing here? And he says, it's important that we see things differently, that we have new perspectives. And so by standing on this desk, he gets a completely different perspective. And so then he makes the boys start to stand on the desk so they get new perspectives.
Stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. See, the world looks very different from up here.
But that's the old cliche, like you know, you have to listen to other people's stories, see things in their way, walk a mile in their shoes. Like, and there's many, many kind of cliches like that, but that's the symbolism there. Like, we have got to see things in different ways with different sets of eyes. So sure, it's an important lesson in school, But that ability to see things from different perspectives, I mean, that is like the cure for every social disease we're currently dealing with. From racism to sexism, like let's see it from another perspective, from another side, instead of living in our traditional bubbles where we can't go outside and go, oh, there is a different point of view. So here's a couple interesting things about this film that I didn't know. One is that Dustin Hoffman was originally going to play the role of Mr. Keating instead of Robin Williams. I thought that was interesting. What a change that would have been. But obviously Robin Williams was an amazing choice. Another interesting thing I read was there's a scene when you watch it where Robin Williams really becomes Robin Williams in a moment where he starts to read poetry like he's John Wayne.
You can also imagine maybe John Wayne is Macbeth going, well, is this a dagger I see before me?
And he does like a Marlon Brando as well. And that whole moment was totally improvised. In fact, the director brought in Robin Williams and the students didn't know what to do. The director said to the students, listen, we're going to let Mr. Keating be Mr. Keating. You guys just act like your students. That was all the notes that they got. And then he did that whole bit. They didn't want to make Robin Williams too funny in this movie. They wanted him to play it kind of serious, but they cut him loose in that moment, and it really shines. Another thing to note is that this is Ethan Hawke's first film, which I thought was cool.
It's the first time I feel like I ever acted in my life was with Robin Williams. I had acted in school plays, but I'd never had what I had kind of heard about, which is this thing that can happen, which is a loss of self, and where you kind of disappear into this other world. And you know, I was 18 years old, and Robin Williams wrote, I sound my barbaric yawp over the rooftops of the world. Uncle Walt again, he says, you know what I mean? And he called me up, and it was a very nerve-wracking scene because Peter Weir wanted to shoot it very simply with a Steadicam. And back then, look, you were even doing this interview with a Steadicam, but back then that was an unheard of new technology, this thing. And he really kind of wanted to get the scene in one take, or at least cut as little as possible. And I was very nervous. All my friends were the actors and I had to do this scene where I had to make up a poem in front of the class. And it's the first time I really felt the beauty of what collaboration can be. Because Robin just looked me in the eyes and he knew how nervous I was. And he was nervous too. And I've been chasing that high my whole life.
Now, you don't get away that easy. Picture of Uncle Walt up there. What does he remind you of? Don't think. Answer.
A madman.
I've been thinking a lot about why Walt Whitman, right? Walt Whitman, he is the poet who wrote The Captain, My Captain. He is the poet who wrote the barbaric yop scene. You'll see Todd Anderson being spun around, and there's an important moment in the film where he completely changes and finally breaks out of his very quiet, shy shell. And Mr. Keating asks him to yop.
Up. Gotta get in yawping stance.
A yawp.
No, not just a yawp. A barbaric yawp.
And that line comes from Song of Myself, Walt Whitman's seminal poem in Leaves of Grass, which I have here. I want you to note something that not a lot of people note. I believe even Mr. Keating wrote it down on the board. It says, I sound my barbaric yawps over the rooftops of the world. But that's not the actual line. The actual line is, I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. So I think there are reasons that they chose Walt Whitman beyond him being Walt Whitman. You know, not only was he probably America's most important poet, but he's really, in a lot of ways, considered the father of free verse, right? When we were mostly reading British poetry, which was rhymed and metered, here comes Walt, and he's like, nope. I'm just going to do this my way. Not as much rhyme, although some of his poems definitely did rhyme. And he self-published his poetry. You know, one of the first successful self-published poetry experiences ever in the history of American letters. And that changed the landscape of American poetry forever. But when his collection was first published, he was absolutely ostracized and insulted and ridiculed. His poems were considered obscene. There was a lot of sexuality. I mean, the dude went for it. And this is like 1856 6, I think, something like that. So this is a long time ago. He was doing back then what the kids today are doing on the TikTok. Even when poor Whitman brought his book home to his family, his brother was like, this is crap. I ain't reading this. This is awful. And that to me reminds me a little bit about Neil Perry and his father, just dismissing art immediately because it has no virtue, no purpose, makes no money, etc.
Is it more of this acting business? Because you can forget that.
So Whitman in his time was groundbreaking, and I think Mr. Keating is in some ways, by using him and being asked to be called captain, saying, look, you too can have a Whitman-esque influence on our world. You've just got to break the rules and do good, and you will get all kinds of accolades in your life. Plus, more importantly, your soul will be satisfied. One of my favorite scenes, for obvious reasons, which you'll hear in a minute, Mr. Keating is trying to explain the importance of poetry. And it's not just about the words and poetry. These kids are at this school because they are bound for Harvard and Yale, and they have very traditional paths. They're going to make lots of money and live on yachts and do all that. But Keating has a different definition of success and of life. He says, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. He says, we read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. And medicine and law and engineering, these are noble pursuits and they're necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for.
Powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?
So when we define success simply by the career path we're on, the title we obtain, the money we have in the bank, I'm not sure we're living. Sure, you're loaded, and you have some influence because of that. But how's your heart? How are your friendships? How are your relationships? Is there romance and love in your life? And that's the message, I think, of the movie, is to really, really seize the day and embrace your heart as much as your head and your wallet. And in that iconic scene at the end, and I'm trying to do this, by the way, without spoilers, because I really think you should not only watch this film, but watch it with your young-ish children, 13, 14, maybe 12 if they're really mature. My son's gonna be 12, he's 11 and a lot of change, and he loved this movie. He was very touched at the end, I'll just say that. But the iconic scene at the moment, not all the boys, half the boys in the classroom stood on their desks and they yelled, "Captain, my captain." And they got the message, finally, right? And that message is seize the day, find different ways to look at things, gather your rosebuds while you may, live a life totally worth living, love deeply. And they get this message and they're standing up there, right? And it's a tearjerker. But when they cut away and do the long shot, you'll see 10 or 15 students still sitting down. It almost appears as if everybody got the message and everybody's standing on their desks. But that's not the case. And I think that was an important little iconic scene for different reasons. The people sitting down affected me as much as the people standing up, because that's how society works, right? You've got your poets and your philosophers and your creative, artists. And then you got the people like, forget those idiots, man. These guys are losers. But I think another important aspect of the film that I didn't know until I was doing a little bit of research is the original screenplay had Robin Williams, Mr. Keating's character, dying of leukemia. Or Lou Gehrig's disease or something like that. The point is, it was introduced early in the original screenplay that Mr. Keating was dying. And they had some scenes in the hospital. And Peter Weir, who directed this film, basically said, I'll do the film, but I don't want Mr. Keating to be dying. And the reason that the writer had introduced Mr. Keating as a dying character is because he felt like that would give him the sense of urgency to seize the day, right? And to value all of these things that we tend not to value until we're faced with death, or we go to a funeral and we go, oh man, I need to spend more time with family. And so Peter Weir said, I don't want to introduce that plot, because when they do stand on the desks at the end, we're saying that we value these values. It's not just when you're dying that you suddenly become this wonderful, whole, good person who loves art and poetry and relationships. We want those to be values all the time, not just when faced with death. And so that changes everything for me. If the original movie had Mr. Keating dying, then all of the things that he teaches us are just because he's dying, not because they are the values and principles that we should aspire to attain ourselves. Does that make sense? All right, I brought in two of the great film critics of Modesto, my boys, Hakeem and Dean. We watched the film as a family about 3 days ago, and it was wonderful to watch, inspiring. So I want to bring them in and get their opinions, but let's start with you, young man. You are 11 3/4 years old. You're going to be 12 in September. Is this a movie young people your age and older should watch? Why or why not?
I think like people around 11 or 12 should see this movie because it has a lot to do with like deeper topics, and also it has some poetry in it, and it did teach me about poetry and famous poets like the Captain My Captain poem. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone should watch it. But when you're 11 or 12.
Okay. What for you was one of the biggest takeaways from the film? Like something that inspired you, or a lesson you learned, or something like that?
At the beginning scenes where they were first meeting Mr. Keating. They were showing him, like he was showing the class pictures of, I think, previous like students, and he was talking to them about like seize the day and carpe diem, and that was, I really like enjoyed that scene. I thought it was very well written.
Carpe diem. Seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary.
Seize the day. So what does seize the day mean?
Well, it means that like every day you should find a way to make yourself better, improve yourself or the people around you.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the impetus of that statement is we don't know how long we're going to be on this earth. So gather your rosebuds while you can, right? Embrace every day like it's your last. There's an old saying, live every day like it's your last, you know? How much nicer would you be to each other if you knew that tomorrow you wouldn't see each other ever again? Wouldn't it change your behavior? Yeah. Carpe diem, buddy. So, Hakeem, what was your takeaway from this film in terms of inspiration or great scenes, or what is memorable?
One of the most memorable scenes for me was when, I forgot the names, with the kid who stands up to his dad.
Neil Perry, yeah.
Okay. When Neil Perry stands up to his dad, when he says that he wants to be an actor, but his dad wants to make him be a banker or something like that.
You have opportunities that I never even dreamt of, and I am not going to let you waste them.
I've got to tell you what I feel.
I've been so worried. What? Tell me what you feel.
So you like the scene where the boy stands up to his father?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
totally
it was a bad dad.
Oh, okay. All right. But, you know, sometimes you got to stand up to authority, and I think that was a powerful subplot, right? Is if your dad or, you know, your principal or teacher or whoever's in a position of authority says you're going to do it this way, and you finally break through that need to be obedient all the time, and you say, no, there's another way. So any other takeaways from the film that you want to share?
As one of the scenes that I really enjoyed also was when Mr. Keating was leaving. When Mr. Keating was leaving the classroom, a bunch of the kids stood up on their desk and started saying, "Captain, my captain."
Captain, my captain. Yeah, that was really powerful. One of the most iconic scenes, visually and everything. And you know, actually, now that I think about it, when he was teaching the boys to stand on the desk, He was saying, I'm here to show you that you can see life from a different perspective, right? And what's the shot called when you're up here and you're looking down? Is there a name for that kind of shot?
There's a name for it. I don't know.
Well, it does imply, if the shot is up here looking down, it implies that the point of view of the person up here is bigger and stronger and bolder, right? And then if the point of view is down here looking up, it implies that this person down here is weak and inferior, etc. But by the end of the film, Mr. Keating is down here, and the boys are up here looking at him, right? So their perspective has changed, and now they have power, inspiration, purpose, and they're saying, Captain, my captain, like, you made us this. And Keating's looking up like, those are my guys. And that's what I think, and this is one of the reasons the movie made me a damn teacher, is because I think teachers, the best kind of teachers, are not the authoritarians who say, do this, do that, I'm better. It's, hey, let's reverse the roles. I want you to be great too, or even better than me.
Mr. Anderson thinks that everything inside of him is worthless and embarrassing. Isn't that right, Todd? And that's your worst fear. I think you're wrong. I think you have something inside of you that is worth a great deal.
Anything else you guys want to add?
Nah. I think we said all that there is to say without spoilers.
Yeah, we're trying not to spoil. I will say this. We will be back live 7 p.m. Thursday, July 23rd. You will have seen the entire movie, and I look forward to having a real question-and-answer session where we can talk about the things we cannot talk about because we do not want to spoil the film. So I hope to see you guys Thursday, July 23rd at 7 p.m. Right?
Yeah.
Bye.